I grew up in that quiet suburban home on Maple Street, the one with the porch swing where my dad and I would talk for hours. My entire childhood was filled with love and security. Every weekend I would drive 3 hours just to help my father fix the roof or repaint the garage. Family always came first for me. Then I found that document on the kitchen counter. 30 years of being their only son, and suddenly, it was as if I never existed. Before I continue my story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit the like button if you have ever felt betrayed by someone you trusted, and subscribe to hear more real-life stories like mine. Growing up as the only child of Thomas and Janet Walker had its perks. My name is Fredrick Walker, 32 years old, and until recently, I thought I knew exactly where I stood in my family. I work as an architectural designer for a mid-sized firm in Portland, a career my parents always encouraged. They attended every art show, praised every blueprint, and celebrated every promotion. Their support shaped my entire identity. My father, Thomas, was the definition of dependable, a former Marine who carried that discipline into civilian life. He worked for 35 years at the same manufacturing company, rising from assembly line to operations, manager through sheer determination. His salt and pepper hair always neatly trimmed his shirts, always ironed to perfection. He taught me that a handshake meant something, that promises were sacred. When I was 8, he promised to build me a treehouse and spent 6 consecutive weekends constructing what the neighborhood kids called the 8th wonder of our block. That was my father, through and through. My mother, Janet, balanced his strictness with warmth that enveloped our home like the scent of her famous apple cinnamon cookies. A kindergarten teacher for 27 years, she approached parenting with the same patience she showed her students. When I struggled with algebra, she sat with me night after night, creating colorful charts and real-world examples until the equations finally clicked. Her gentle encouragement pushed me through college when I doubted my abilities. They were not just good parents. They were extraordinary. Their dedication inspired my own loyalty. When Hartwell & Associates offered me a dream position in Chicago with a salary that made my eyes water, I turned it down. The thought of moving 6 hours away from my parents felt wrong. Instead, I accepted a more modest role at Wilson Design, just 45 minutes from my childhood home. Every Sunday I drove over for dinner, often staying to help with household projects or simply to watch old Western movies with my dad, while Mom pretended not to be interested yet, somehow knew every character by name. When their anniversary came around each October, I organized everything from restaurant reservations to surprise weekend getaways. Last year I spent 3 months secretly restoring my grandfather's pocket watch as a gift for my father, working late into the night after my regular job. The look on his face when he opened that box made every exhausted morning worth it. That was our relationship. Present, supportive, reliable. The first hint that something might be changing came last Thanksgiving. My parents canceled our traditional dinner with just 2 days' notice, claiming they had been invited to their new neighbor, Maxwell Jordan's house instead. When I offered to join, my mother sounded flustered, quickly explaining that it was a small gathering for the residents of their street only. It struck me as odd, but I brushed it off, spending the holiday microwaving a frozen turkey dinner and watching football alone. After that, the cancellations became more frequent. Our Sunday dinners fell victim to mysterious schedule conflicts. Phone calls went to voicemail more often than not. When we did speak, my parents seemed distracted, often mentioning Maxwell and the wonderful things he was doing in the community. Maxwell was funding a new wing at the hospital. Maxwell had connections with city planners. Maxwell had traveled to 37 countries and spoke 4 languages. One evening, when I dropped by unannounced with takeout, I overheard my father on the phone, his voice lowered. I caught fragments about investments and opportunities that would never come again. When he noticed me, he abruptly ended the call and changed the subject. My mother avoided my questions about their sudden interest in investment strategies with vague references to retirement planning. Despite these warning signs, I remained steadfastly trusting. These were my parents, after all. The people who had taught me about integrity and honesty. if they were exploring new friendships or interests that was natural at their stage of life. They deserved to enjoy their retirement years. Maxwell Jordan seemed to make them happy, and that was what mattered most to me. I ignored the knot of unease growing in my stomach. The third weekend of April was unusually warm, perfect weather for the surprise visit I had planned. My mother loved my homemade lasagna, and I had spent the morning preparing it just the way she taught me, with 3 different cheeses and that secret ingredient she swore by. The drive to their house was familiar, every turn automatic after years of making the same journey. I planned to surprise them, maybe convince them to eat dinner on the back patio, like we used to do during summer evenings when I was growing up. As I pulled into their driveway, I noticed both their cars were gone. Unusual for a Saturday afternoon when my father typically worked in his garden and my mother caught up on her reading. But I had a key, and the lasagna would keep in their refrigerator until they returned. What I could not possibly know was that crossing that threshold would shatter 32 years of family trust in an instant. The house was quiet as I let myself in, calling out their names despite the empty driveway. Silence answered back, broken only by the familiar tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway. I headed to the kitchen to store the food, but stopped short in the living room, noticing changes that seemed out of character. A massive new television dominated the wall, where family photos once hung. The comfortable old recliner my father loved had been replaced by sleek leather furniture that looked like it belonged in a magazine, not in the cozy home I knew. In the kitchen, more surprises awaited. Marble countertops had replaced the worn laminate where I had learned to roll cookie dough. High-end appliances gleamed under cabinet lighting. A wine refrigerator hummed quietly in the corner. Strange for my parents, who shared an occasional glass on special occasions, but were far from connoisseurs. These renovations would have cost tens of thousands of dollars, far outside my parents' modest retirement budget. I placed the lasagna in the refrigerator, leaving a note explaining my surprise visit. As I searched for a pen to complete my message, I opened the drawer beside the refrigerator. Instead of the junk drawer I expected, I found it neatly organized with expensive-looking stationery. A legal-sized envelope rested on top, unsealed, with my parents' names printed in formal typeset. Curiosity got the better of me. I am ashamed to admit now, but that moment of weakness revealed the truth they had been hiding. The document inside was unmistakably a will, dated just 3 weeks earlier. The formal legal language was difficult to parse, but certain phrases leapt from the page with crystal clarity. In the event of their deaths, Thomas and Janet Walker left the entirety of their estate, including the house savings and personal property, to one Maxwell Jordan and the Jordan Family Foundation. My name appeared only once in a paragraph explicitly stating that Fredrick Thomas Walker had been intentionally omitted as a beneficiary. My hands trembled as I read it again, certain I had misunderstood. But the language was unmistakable. My parents had written me out of their will, completely leaving everything to a man they had known less than a year. 30 years of being their son erased in black and white. The betrayal cut so deep, I physically staggered, leaning against the unfamiliar marble counter for support. Beneath the will was another document, this one detailing a series of loans totaling nearly $160,000 made to Maxwell Jordan for his foundation. These loans came directly from my parents' retirement accounts, representing most of their life savings. The paperwork promised extraordinary returns of 15% annually, secured by properties owned by the foundation. Properties that, according to the loan terms, could not be inspected due to confidentiality agreements. I sank into a kitchen chair, the document spread before me, trying to understand what had happened to the cautious, sensible parents I knew. My father, who researched lawnmower purchases for weeks before deciding. My mother, who clipped coupons despite having a comfortable savings account. These were not people who made impulsive financial decisions or trusted strangers with their life savings. The sound of a car in the driveway jolted me back to awareness. I gathered the papers, intending to return them to the drawer, but anger and hurt overwhelmed my better judgment. They deserved to explain themselves. I deserved to know why I had been erased. When my parents walked through the door laughing together, In a way I had not heard in months, the papers were still clutched in my hand. Their laughter died when they saw me. My mother froze her eyes, darting to the documents I held. My father straightened his posture, jaw tightening in the way it did when he prepared for confrontation. I did not shout. Somehow that seemed beneath the magnitude of the moment. I simply held up the will and asked, "Why would you do this?" The silence stretched for 10 excruciating seconds before my father spoke. "Fredrick, those are private legal documents. You had no right to go through our personal papers. No acknowledgement of what the documents contained. No explanation for why they had cut me out. Just admonishment for discovering their secret. I have been your son for 32 years, I said, my voice barely steady. I turned down job offers to stay close to you. I visit every week. I help around the house. I have been there through everything. And you leave everything to a stranger. You cut me out completely." My mother would not meet my eyes, suddenly absorbed in arranging her purse and keys on the counter. My father, however, fixed me with a cold stare I had never seen directed at me before. "Maxwell is not a stranger to us," he said. "He has shown us opportunities we never imagined possible. And frankly, you have always expected everything to be handed to you. This house, our savings, these are ours to do with as we please." The unfairness of his accusation struck me physically like a slap across the face. I had never asked them for money, had never expected an inheritance. My hurt was not about the assets, but about what they represented being valued as their son. "Do you know what Maxwell is doing with your loans?" I asked, holding up the second document. "Have you seen these properties, supposedly securing your retirement money?" A flicker of uncertainty crossed my mother's face, but my father remained unmoved. "Maxwell is a businessman, with connections we cannot begin to understand," he said dismissively. "Sometimes investments need to remain confidential for legal reasons." The front door opened again without a knock, and Maxwell Jordan himself strolled in as if he owned the place. Perhaps in a way he already did. He was younger than my parents by at least 15 years, expensively dressed in casual clothes that nevertheless screamed money. His smile faltered only briefly when he saw me, then returned with practiced charm. "Fredrick is not it. So nice to finally meet Thomas and Janet's son. They speak of you often." Maxwell extended his hand as if we were being introduced at a cocktail party, not in the middle of a family crisis. I ignored his outstretched hand, instead holding up the loan documents. "What exactly is the Jordan Family Foundation? Where are these properties securing my parents' retirement savings?" Maxwell's smile tightened, almost imperceptibly. "The foundation handles sensitive charitable matters for private clients. Our work requires discretion." He turned to my parents. "Perhaps this is a family discussion," Best continued. "Another time." My father nodded gratefully. "Yes, that might be best. Fredrick was just leaving." "Just leaving?" I echoed, disbelieving. "We have barely begun to discuss this." "There is nothing to discuss," my father insisted. "These are our decisions to make." I looked to my mother, hoping for some sign of the woman who had taught me about fairness and open communication. Her eyes remained fixed on the floor. When I glanced back at Maxwell, I caught something I was not meant to see, a subtle smirk quickly disguised as concern. In that momentary expression, I glimpsed satisfaction, triumph. The look of a predator who had successfully separated the vulnerable from their protection. From me. I was being replaced and erased by this man who had somehow convinced my parents to trust him over their own son. The pain was so acute, I could barely breathe. "I do not recognize either of you right now," I said, quietly gathering my keys. "Whatever he has told you, whatever you believe about me 32 years, should count for something. When you remember who you really are, call me." I walked out the door, leaving the lasagna in the refrigerator and the documents on the table. In my rearview mirror, I saw Maxwell place a proprietary hand on my father's shoulder as they watched me drive away. The image burned itself into my memory, fueling what came next. I checked into a hotel 20 miles away, unable to face returning to my apartment, where photos of happier family times would only deepen my pain. The room was generic and soulless, perfect for the hollow feeling consuming me. I sat on the edge of the bed for hours, replaying every interaction with my parents over recent months, searching for clues I had missed. The tears eventually came around midnight, hot and angry, soaking the hotel pillow as I curled into myself. The betrayal felt physical, an actual pain in my chest that made it difficult to breathe. My entire identity had been built around being a good son, and now that foundation had crumbled beneath me. Who was I if not Thomas and Janet Walker's boy? Sleep came in fitful bursts, interrupted by dreams where I walked through my childhood home, while my parents looked through me as if I were a ghost. I woke at dawn, exhausted, but with a new emotion emerging through the pained determination. My parents were not cruel people. This dramatic personality change had a cause, and that cause had a name: Maxwell Jordan. My architectural training had taught me to solve problems methodically. When a design failed, you did not abandon the project. You analyzed the failure, identified the weak point, and reconstructed. I would approach this family crisis the same way. Step 1. Gather information. I opened my laptop and began researching. Maxwell Jordan was surprisingly difficult to find online. His social media presence was minimal and carefully curated. The Jordan Family Foundation had a website, but it was suspiciously vague about specific projects, listing no address beyond a P.O. box. Red flags accumulated with each search result. By mid-morning, I had created a document tracking what little I could verify about Maxwell. He had appeared in town approximately 10 months ago. Before that, traces of him appeared in Phoenix, Arizona, and before that, Tampa, Florida. The foundation was registered as a nonprofit, but its financial disclosures were minimal. I expanded my search, looking for patterns: wealthy retirees, investment opportunities, foundations with vague charitable missions. On the third page of results, I found a community forum for family members concerned about elderly financial abuse. A post from a woman named Barbara in Phoenix caught my attention. Has anyone dealt with Maxwell Jordan or the Jordan Family Foundation? My aunt lost everything. I created an account immediately and messaged Barbara privately. Within an hour, we were speaking on the phone. Her story chilled me to the bone. Her aunt, a wealthy widow, had been approached by Maxwell at a charity event. Within months, he had integrated himself completely into her life. By the time Barbara realized what was happening, her aunt had changed her will and liquidated most of her assets to invest in Maxwell's foundation. When Barbara raised concerns, her aunt cut off contact, convinced that her family was jealous of her new friendship. Most disturbing of all, by the time legal proceedings confirmed the fraud, the money was gone, and Maxwell had disappeared. Her aunt now lived with Barbara, her retirement dreams shattered along with her bank account. The experience had left her not just financially devastated, but emotionally broken, unable to trust her own judgment. Barbara put me in touch with 3 other families who had similar experiences in different states. The pattern was always the same. Maxwell targeted comfortable but not wealthy retirees, isolated them from family through subtle manipulation, then convinced them to invest in his foundation. By the time the fraud was discovered, he had moved on to a new location and new victims. Armed with this information, I contacted Susan Blackwood, an attorney specializing in elder law. After hearing my story and reviewing the documents I had photographed, she confirmed my fears. This has all the hallmarks of a sophisticated confidence scheme, she explained. The isolation from family, the rapid financial decisions, the vague investment opportunities with unusually high returns. Your parents are being manipulated by someone who has done this before. But they are not elderly, I protested. My father is only 63, my mother 61. They are sharp, educated people. Susan shook her head sadly. This type of predator does not necessarily target the elderly. They look for anyone with assets who can be emotionally manipulated. Often they find people at vulnerable points in their lives. Has anything significant happened to your parents recently? The question struck a chord. My father's brother had died unexpectedly the previous year. They had been close, and the loss had hit him hard. Around the same time, my mother had retired from teaching, struggling to find purpose in her newly empty days. the perfect emotional storm for a manipulator like Maxwell. My course of action became clear. I needed proof that Maxwell was not who he claimed to be. Evidence my parents could not ignore. Susan helped me develop a strategic plan to gather information legally. If Maxwell had done this before, he would have been careless somewhere. No con artist was perfect. Over the next 2 weeks, I took a leave of absence from work and devoted myself entirely to building a case. I traveled to Phoenix and Tampa, meeting with Maxwell's previous victims and collecting affidavits. I found Thomas Jordan, no relation to Maxwell, whose identity had been partially stolen to create the illusion of family wealth backing the foundation. I even located a former associate of Maxwell's, who had been promised a percentage of the scheme's profits, but had been betrayed himself. Each piece of evidence strengthened my resolve. This was not just about an inheritance anymore. This was about protecting my parents from someone who would drain their accounts and disappear, leaving them financially and emotionally devastated. I could not let that happen regardless of how they had hurt me. With Susan Blackwood's guidance, I prepared a careful presentation of evidence. Then I called my mother, suggesting a family dinner to mend fences. She sounded relieved, perhaps feeling guilty about our confrontation. I specifically requested that Maxwell join us, claiming I wanted to get to know the man who had become so important to my parents. They readily agreed, playing directly into my plan. I arrived at their house early, ostensibly to help cook, but actually to place a small legal recording device under the dining room table. Susan had confirmed that in our state I could record conversations I participated in without informing other parties. The evidence I hoped to capture would be crucial if legal action became necessary. My parents were cautiously warm, clearly hoping to move past our disagreement without actually addressing it. Maxwell arrived bearing expensive wine and gourmet chocolates, every inch the generous family friend. Throughout dinner, he was charismatic and attentive, complimenting my mother's cooking and asking thoughtful questions about my work. Had I not known what lurked beneath the charming facade, I might have been taken in myself. As dessert was served, I carefully guided the conversation toward investments and the foundation. Maxwell spoke eloquently about humanitarian projects in developing countries and renewable energy investments that would revolutionize rural communities while generating exceptional returns. My parents nodded along clearly, having heard and believed this pitch many times before. I listened attentively, then began asking specific questions. Which countries hosted these projects? Could he share the engineering firms involved? Perhaps my architectural background might be useful to the foundation. With each question, Maxwell's answers became vaguer, more evasive. A flash of annoyance crossed his face when I pressed for details. These projects involve confidential partnerships, he explained smoothly. Our investors value their privacy. But I would be happy to discuss potential involvement once you have shown the same level of commitment to our mission that your parents have. The implication was clear. Only those who invested money were worthy of information. My father frowned at my persistent questions, interpreting them as rudeness toward their esteemed guest. Fredrick Maxwell has extensive business experience, he said dismissively. These matters are more complex than residential architecture. The condescension stung, but I pressed on, bringing up the failed projects in Arizona that Barbara had told me about. Maxwell barely missed a beat, explaining them away as ventures that had been sabotaged by unscrupulous local partners. My parents accepted his explanation without question, shooting me disappointed looks. The breaking point came when I mentioned Tampa directly. I recently spoke with a Thomas Jordan, who says you claim to be related to him. Interesting coincidence. Maxwell set down his fork, his charm evaporating. I have never claimed any relation to anyone in Tampa. Your son seems to have been misled by someone. My father stood abruptly. That is enough, Fredrick. You come into our home after snooping through our private papers, and now you ambush our guest with baseless accusations. I kept my voice calm. Did you know there are 3 legal judgments against Maxwell in other states? Did you know the address listed for the foundation properties does not exist? Lies and slander. Maxwell interjected, his voice hard. I will not sit here and be insulted by someone who clearly resents his parents finding purpose outside his control. My mother began to cry quietly. Thomas, I think perhaps we should listen. But my father was too far gone. His face flushed with anger. Get out, Fredrick. Until you can show Maxwell the respect he deserves, you are not welcome here. I stood slowly, looking directly at Maxwell. Tell them about Barbara Thompson's aunt in Phoenix. Tell them about the Wilsons in Tampa. Tell them how much money disappeared. For a split second, Maxwell faltered surprise, registering in his eyes at the specific names. Then he recovered, but not before making a critical mistake. The Wilsons were fully aware of the investment risks. Their lawsuit was dismissed. I had never mentioned a lawsuit. That information had not been made public. The recording under the table captured his inadvertent confession. My father did not notice the slip, but my mother did. I saw doubt flicker across her face for the first time. It was a small crack in the facade, but it was something. I left the house as instructed, but not before looking back at my mother and saying, "When you are ready to hear the truth, call me. All of it." Outside, I sat in my car, trembling with adrenaline and emotion. The confrontation had gone both better and worse than I had hoped. Maxwell had revealed more than he intended, but my father remained completely under his influence. As I prepared to drive away, I saw the front door open. My father emerged, still shouting, his face contorted with rage. Then suddenly he clutched his chest, staggering on the front step. As I watched in horror, he collapsed to the ground. I sprinted from my car as my mother screamed from the doorway. My father lay motionless on the concrete path, his face ashen. My architectural training had included basic first aid for construction sites. I checked his pulse, found it irregular and weak, and immediately began CPR while shouting for my mother to call an ambulance. Maxwell stood in the doorway watching, but not helping, his expression unreadable. The next hours passed in a blur of emergency rooms, frightened questions, and fluorescent lights. My father had suffered a major heart attack. Without immediate CPR, the doctors said he might not have survived the ambulance ride. As he was rushed into surgery, my mother clung to my arm, all thoughts of wills and investments forgotten in the face of potentially losing her husband of 40 years. Maxwell made a brief appearance in the waiting room, offering generic sympathies before explaining he had an important meeting he could not miss. He promised to return the next day. As he walked away, I saw my mother watching him with new eyes, registering his quick departure at this critical moment. "We will get through this," I told her, squeezing her hand. "Dad is strong." For the first time in months, she squeezed back, nodding through her tears. My father survived the surgery but faced a long recovery. I spent that first night in the hospital with my mother, both of us dozing uncomfortably in waiting room chairs. By morning, something had shifted between us. Crisis has a way of burning away pretense, leaving only what matters most. And what mattered was family. When my father stabilized enough for visitors, I sat with my mother at his bedside. He looked smaller, somehow vulnerable in the hospital gown, with monitoring wires attached to his chest. His anger had been replaced by a quiet weariness that made him appear older than his years. "The doctor believes the heart attack was brought on by extreme stress," my mother said softly, her hand resting on my father's arm. She gave me a meaningful look. "We have been under a lot of pressure lately with investment decisions." It was the opening I had waited for. Without accusation or anger, I asked if Maxwell had come to visit. My mother shook her head, explaining he had called with excuses about being tied up with foundation business. His absence spoke volumes. "Dad, Mom, I have something important to show you," I said gently, pulling out my phone. "I have been investigating Maxwell because I was worried about you. What I found is difficult to hear, but you need to know the truth." My father started to protest weakly, but my mother placed her hand over his. "Let us listen, Thomas, please." I played the recording from dinner, first highlighting Maxwell's slip about the lawsuit he should not have known about. Then I showed them photographs of the properties supposedly securing their loans, properties that did not exist. Finally, I shared video testimonials from Maxwell's previous victims, including Barbara Thompson and her aunt, who described with heartbreaking clarity how Maxwell had earned their trust and then betrayed it. My father's face remained impassive throughout, but I saw his eyes glistening with unshed tears. My mother wept openly, especially when Barbara's aunt described the shame of admitting how thoroughly she had been deceived. When the last video ended, silence filled the hospital room. I did not push or demand a response. This moment needed to unfold at their pace, not mine. Finally, my father spoke, his voice rough with emotion. I was a fool. 3 simple words that must have cost him tremendously. My father, who prided himself on wisdom and good judgment, acknowledging he had been completely deceived. We both were my mother, added, wiping her tears. We wanted to believe in something exciting and different for our retirement. He made us feel special, chosen for these exclusive opportunities. Then, once we were involved, he began suggesting that you wanted to control our decisions, that you felt entitled to our savings. We should have known better, my father said, looking at me directly, for the first time. You have never given us reason to doubt your love or intentions. We let him turn us against our own son. The relief of being believed, of being seen clearly again by my parents, was overwhelming. I had prepared for a much longer, harder battle. Perhaps the heart attack had shaken loose. Maxwell's influence, creating space for them to see the manipulation that had ensnared them. What do we do now? My mother asked, fear replacing her tears. Nearly all their retirement savings had gone to Maxwell, and the chance of recovery was slim. We fight back, I said with calm determination. I have already spoken with authorities in 3 states where Maxwell operated previously. With your testimony, they can build a stronger case. And attorney Susan Blackwood believes we have grounds for both criminal charges and a civil suit. My father nodded slowly. Whatever it takes. We will not let him do this to anyone else. Over the next few days, as my father regained strength, we developed a plan. My parents would pretend to still trust Maxwell, gathering additional evidence, while authorities built their case. I would move back into my childhood home temporarily, both to support my father during recovery and to ensure Maxwell could not isolate them again. When Maxwell finally appeared at the hospital 3 days after the heart attack, bringing an ostentatious flower arrangement and rehearsed concern, my parents played their parts perfectly. They accepted his excuses and reassurances, pretending nothing had changed. If he noticed my presence or was suspicious of my reconciliation with my parents, he did not show it. His arrogance had blinded him to the possibility that his victims might see through him. The case against Maxwell built steadily over the following months. My parents discovered they were not his only victims in town. 3 other couples had invested substantial sums in the foundation. When approached carefully, 2 of them agreed to join the case. Financial records revealed a pattern of transfers to offshore accounts that investigators were able to trace and freeze. 6 months after my father's heart attack, Maxwell Jordan was arrested at my parents' home while attempting to collect another investment check. The expression on his face when officers appeared from the kitchen where they had been waiting was a moment of vindication none of us would ever forget. The legal process would be lengthy, the detective warned us. Recovery of funds was possible but not guaranteed. Maxwell had hidden money skillfully and spent lavishly. My parents would likely never recoup all they had lost. But the important thing was that he was stopped before emptying their accounts completely and before moving on to devastate other families. My parents did update their will again, though I insisted it did not matter to me. What mattered was rebuilding our relationship, which we did slowly through honest conversations that were sometimes painful but always necessary. My father apologized repeatedly for the things he had said, for doubting my intentions and character. My mother worked through her shame at being so thoroughly deceived, understanding, gradually, that intelligent good people can fall victim to skilled manipulators. We established new traditions, weekly family dinners, where open communication was the only rule, monthly financial discussions, where all 3 of us reviewed accounts together, providing transparency and shared wisdom. The experience had changed us individually and as a family, creating stronger boundaries, but also deeper appreciation for the relationship we had nearly lost. 1 year after discovering that devastating will on the kitchen counter, we sat together on the porch swing of their home, now returned to its comfortable, modest state after removing Maxwell's ostentatious additions. My father, fully recovered physically, though still working through the emotional aftermath, put his arm around my shoulders. "You know what I learned from all this?" he asked quietly. "What, Dad?" "That inheritance is not about money or property. It is about values, about the wisdom and love we pass down. You inherited the best parts of us long ago, your mother's compassion, my determination. No con man could ever take that away." My mother, joining us with glasses of lemonade, added her own reflection. "And we learned that forgiveness does not mean forgetting or excusing. It means choosing to move forward without letting the pain define you. Without your forgiveness, Fredrick, we would have lost something far more valuable than money." She was right. The journey through betrayal and reconciliation had taught me that forgiveness was not weakness but strength. That protecting those you love sometimes means fighting for them, even when they push you away. And that family bonds, when tested and strained, can emerge stronger if there is willingness to acknowledge hurt and rebuild trust. Maxwell Jordan eventually faced justice, sentenced to 12 years for fraud and financial elder abuse. The money he stole from my parents and others created wounds that would take years to heal financially. But the deeper healing of our family had already begun. We were not defined by what we lost, but by what we reclaimed: our trust in each other, our shared values, and the knowledge that when tested our love had proven stronger than deception. If you have experienced family betrayal, or if someone you love is being manipulated, please share your story in the comments below. Sometimes knowing we are not alone makes all the difference. Click the like button if this story resonated with you. Subscribe for more real-life experiences, and share this video with someone who might need to hear that reconciliation is possible, even after the deepest betrayal. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember that forgiveness does not mean forgetting. It means choosing to move forward with wisdom and strength.